Before we can collectively move forward as a more conscious society, we must encourage an individual intellectual honesty when it comes to the assimilation of new information. Too many people think that based on their ignorance or based on what they dislike, they can fundamentally reject information which is presented to them. This is intellectually dishonest because you cannot logically definitively claim a negative without disproving the claim. Now you might think, oh, but the burden of proof is on the one making the claim. But that's actually a two-way street because it is technically also making an assertion to claim something as untrue. Therefore, what we should have if we are intellectually honest is a sort of probability vector floating around our mind in regards to new information, which fluctuates based on the evidence presented until the truth or untruth of something can be proven without a shadow of a doubt. If the average person were capable of approaching new information by saying, I find this highly improbable, but still considering evidence surrounding the information rather than simply denying it, that would be a large societal step in the right direction. It may seem uncomfortable to operate primarily under probabilities and to say, I disagree with something, but I have to acknowledge that it may be possible, or that I agree with something, but I have to acknowledge that it may be untrue. But that is simply the only way to be intellectually honest with the potential of reality given the perceptual limitations that we operate under. This sort of basic logic should be taught as part of the educational process, quite frankly, or at the very least, passed from parent to child if you want your offspring to be intellectually honest. But since I can't time travel and retroactively manifest either of those things, all I can do is publicly put this information out here and hope that it will catch on and people will begin to consciously recognize this sort of logical integrity. Now, this principle is especially relevant when confronting spiritual or conspiratorial information, because it is in these contexts that people are often most likely to violently reject information without a proper logical foundation from which to do so. Simply put, it is logically dishonest to reject the possibility of spiritual things or of conspiracies without adequately defining and understanding the information surrounding the particular topic. And it isn't just people who reject spirituality entirely who engage in this logical dishonesty. There are, of course, a very large number of people within various spiritual communities who become offended and reject ideas without adequately examining them. Of course, the same thing applies to accepting ideas without adequately examining them. As I mentioned, we should constantly analyze our own beliefs based on probabilities rather than the false comfort of certainty. Similarly, the quantity and severity of hidden and often not so hidden conspiracies in this world is an extraordinarily important thing to speculate on and confront. And when people think that they can fundamentally deny the possibility of harsh-sounding conspiracies because they do not like them, or they have been psychologically programmed to associate the word conspiracy with absurd falsehood, it is destructive to their own understanding of the potential of the world around them. I particularly speak of all this now because it is very important that people begin to more actively confront and recognize, at the very least, the kinds of conspiracies which in particular are designed to program certain social narratives. Furthermore, as I speak, there are people who hold many terrifying and horrific secrets which they cannot currently give to society because people are not capable of processing information which they wish to disagree with in a logical manner. Honestly, we have been on the brink of disclosure about aliens, about interdimensional ghosts, about the true history of humanity, about God and demons for years now, but the information is withheld because the average person is still violently reactionary and frequently delusional when confronted with supposedly conspiratorial information. Very few people can fundamentally stretch their imaginations around various facets of reality, such as the aforementioned nature of how social narratives are controlled by the information that is popularly presented. Unfortunately, if you wish to confront reality, you must be capable of recognizing the lengths that malicious groups of people are willing to go to set up cultural narratives and triggers over decades. If you wish to confront reality, you will need to be able to imagine the motivations of completely unempathic, psychopathic hedonists. I'm not going to talk about specific details of what I'm referring to here, but people need to be ready to logically assimilate new information before those who have been fighting for your freedom behind the scenes can begin to discuss what is actually happening in reality with you. Until there is a cultural shift to want to understand these secret things rather than hiding from them and fearing them, you will have to dig through personal media outlets rather than corporatized ones and use your intuition to adjust your probability vectors on your own. I will provide an example of how this notion of intellectual honesty plays out. If I were to tell you that the moon is a space station, it would be logical of you to be very skeptical of this information. However, you should recognize that you do not have the depth of information necessary to definitively disregard this claim. You can say that you don't believe it, and that it is highly unlikely, but it would be logically dishonest to say that you are certain of its untruth. If I were to then present you with information about its very strange orbit, which is far more circular than any other natural satellites, which are all elliptical in nature, the strangeness of the fact that it is constantly facing us, which is likewise unlike any other satellite in all of the known universe, the strangeness of its perfectly precise size proportions in comparison to the Sun from our perspective, and then I were to show you information about how it's supposedly older than the Earth, that it rings like a bell when struck by asteroids, and then I were to show you a number of video clips from amateur astronomers of objects entering and exiting the moon, and then finally point out several locations on the moon that are photoshopped and scrubbed out on the Google moon, you might be inclined to think that there is a slightly higher possibility that the moon is in fact a space station, or at least that there is something strange going on up there. However, if you were to fundamentally reject the idea because you disliked it, you might refuse to even observe any of the evidence I was providing you with, which is simply intellectually dishonest. Now, there are many other subconscious biases which we must culturally and individually confront before we can expect any sort of large public disclosures, such as a general subconscious bias towards popularity, which could include, for example, the notion that since my or other channels have few followers, we are not presenting worthwhile information. That sort of biased deferment minimizes your own capacity to critically analyze reality by thinking that a common perception holds a greater value, which is almost never the case. It's almost always the opposite, inasmuch as common perceptions are severely limiting. But I'm not going to go into all that right now. For now, I just want to encourage you to focus on the intellectual honesty of interpreting new information along a spectrum of probability rather than through full acceptance or rejection. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk. I sincerely hope that I've given you something worth thinking about and that you will be able to encourage others to likewise process new information with this sort of intellectual honesty within your own life.